Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carter Wilbur. As you heard, I'm a U.S. State Department economic officer in the Office of Multilateral Trade Affairs in the State Department's Bureau of Economic and Business Affairs. I will attempt to not duplicate too much of what Das Gorman said. I think we'll hear the similarities between what we have to say. So I will hopefully give a little bit more insight and go a little bit deeper in a few different areas. But first of all, I want to thank you, Lee, and the committee for the opportunity to join your discussion today. Stage for the discussion by saying that I agree with the premise of the committee's study topic. The United States does need resilient, diverse, secure medical supply chains to ensure our collective health security, our economic prosperity, and really our national security. As we all know, the COVID-19 pandemic has certainly impacted abilities, but that's not the only thing. Cyber attacks, climate shocks, extreme weather events, terrorist attacks, geopolitical and economic competitive competitions, these all expose the vulnerabilities in the availability and integrity of critical goods, products, and services. The State Department role is to work with our allies and partners to build a diplomatic framework for agreements that will secure partnerships to make global investments in resilient supply chains really work. Now, I want to turn to some of the factors relevant to how we address those vulnerabilities and provide you with some of my thoughts. I draw your attention to what is sort of considered a natural tension between efficiency, cost effectiveness, and resilience. It's critical to understand how all of these work together in the public and private sector outlook and their approach. If you look back at trade structures, even as late as mid-2019, the dominant theory was a just-in-time manufacturing paradigm. A producer wanted the bare minimum of capital tied up in inventory. And forgive me if I'm lecturing to the more knowledgeable, but that sets the stage that looking at this, you can see even before the pandemic, and really by really taking root in early 2020, the discussion shifted to seeming in case structure, and certainly the pandemic amplified that. Conversations that I had with institutional investors and market makers, they related their evaluations of a just-in-time based company meant a deeper dive into how that company justified use that dime, whether they were relying on a vertical integration model or something else, but they needed to explain why they were doing that. So businesses were embracing the idea that some additional cost through lost efficiency to establish resilience in their supply chains was acceptable. And I think that's an important point, that we saw that even before the pandemic really took hold. Now, the precise amount of acceptable additional cost is going to vary by industry and over time, and what any curve of acceptable inefficiencies will look like remains to be seen. But history tends to show that competitive industries will seek increased efficiencies for short-term comparative advantage. And that makes it reasonable to assume that absent any kind of external force, factor, or shock, that efficiency will tend to increase over time at the expense of resilience. Now, improved efficiency is only one of the strengths of a free market system. And as the basis of the study shows, it can be a weakness when external events challenge the efficient movement of raw materials, intermediate goods, or finished products through what turns out we may not even known they were, but is a and by the same token, a diverse supply chain can reinforce cost efficiencies, and by a variety of ways, including competitive pricing. There's a valid distinction to be made between diverse and resilient in terms of supply chains. A diverse supply chain encompasses a variety of factors, such as geographic or multiple supplier or a range of small, medium, and large companies in their supply chain. Whereas I view resilience as more of an overall statement that the supply chain minimizes points of failure. So that's more of a qualitative judgment on the whole supply chain, I think. For a diverse group of producers in terms of size and corporate ownership, but is all located in one country, it is not a really resilient one because it's not geographically diverse. So the political decision not to trade with the United States could also result in a diverse supply chain tax resiliency if that diversity is located in one political jurisdiction. So the objective then is for supply chains to be resilient, diverse, and secure. And as Gorman pointed out, the Biden administration, the National Strategy for a Resilient Public Health Supply Chain is publicly available, and I encourage you to do that as part of its information gathering process if you haven't already, which I assume you have. This strategy encompasses how to build and sustain U.S. domestic manufacturing, complemented by strategic near and allied shoring trade. To be clear, the U.S. cannot achieve the goals of a resilient supply chain without our allies and reliable trading partners. Along with domestic and this allied manufacturing, the strategy envisions a range of efforts to improve supply chains, such as building in redundancies, improving agility, and the ability to rapidly respond to changes in demand, maintaining adequate stockpiles, increasing visibility and analytics to monitor the public health supply chains, and supporting world-class American manufacturing base and workforce. Now, close cooperation on resilient supply chains with allies and partners who share our values will foster this collective economic and national security goal and strengthen the capacity to respond to international disasters and emergencies. Here again, what's really important is that ability to respond to the unplanned or unpredicted events, having that resilience and adaptability as well. Now, the international trading relationships also enable U.S. domestic producers to maintain capacity, whether that's a baseline or even beyond that as a surge capacity that is called for in a purely domestic U.S. market. They can do that by exporting the excess that exceeds the domestic demand into international markets, but we have to have those trading relationships in place. Now, regarding domestic manufacturing, I defer to Das Gorman and the Commerce and other domestic agencies on that, but I will note there's an interplay between some of the proposed domestic growth strategies and our current international trade obligations, such that the use of certain strategies could have some unintended consequences. Now, for example, some potential mechanisms for encouraging domestic production could be challenged and inconsistent with existing international trade commitments. Many of these trade commitments are beneficial to the United States. There's a net gain for U.S. businesses by opening certain U.S. markets to competition, and in exchange, we receive access to larger foreign markets. So these commitments could reap significant unintended negative consequences to U.S. businesses. Now, that being said, I do believe that we can successfully navigate the landscape of our existing trade commitments, which benefit U.S. businesses and workers, and support good U.S. paying jobs in our export industries, while working with our allies and trading partners to strengthen both our overall trade relationships and our global medical supply chains. Now, one example of this is the recent notice of proposed rulemaking related to Buy American policies. This shows that there is a way to use U.S. government procurement dollars, for example, in ways that is consistent with our international trade obligations to achieve specific policy goals. Now, when specifically addressing the trade in critical items needed in response to a global public health crisis, whether it's vaccines, therapeutics, diagnostics, other medical products, naturally, one of the issues that arises is the likelihood that these items are also needed in the exporting country's own domestic markets. And we have seen that through the pandemic experiences. Now, in general, our WTO commitments and the WTO agreements have some flexibility how emergency trade restrictions related to, for example, national security, health, or other reasons. Now, these might otherwise contravene the WTO obligations. These agreements, and this is very important, however, they do require that any such restrictions be targeted, temporary, transparent, and non-discriminatory. I cannot stress this enough that these emergency measures must not be used as a backdoor attempt at trade protectionism. I believe that everyone agrees that we can always do better in terms of the level of detail, the accuracy and the fidelity and the information we have concerning our trade estimates and the medical supply chain specifically. This consequently limits our ability to fully understand where our vulnerabilities are. And as pointed out, this is where it is critical to have that feedback loop with industry. To hear what is really happening and to have that honest understanding of where the genuine problems are, and which tells us what we can do in terms of responses for that. Trade estimates are, as I said, so important, and state is happy to work with our international trade colleagues such as USTR and the Department of Commerce to provide inputs to the broader planning and capacity examination process. It's focused on these international trade aspects of the medical supply chains. Efforts along this line are already underway as part of the executive order on medical supply chain implementation. Regarding promoting the domestic accessibility of devices, refer to the relevant USG agencies such as HHS, FDA, and even Commerce. Where international trade can promote the accessibility, state works to support the efforts through our existing interagency coordination processes and our ability to reach out and negotiate with foreign counterparts. In sum, there are various opportunities to pursue how to promote supply chain diversification, security, and resiliency, including onshoring and reshoring, nearshoring, and friendshoring. Nearshoring concerns addressed, friendshoring addresses political concerns. Each of these options has different pros and cons across a wide range of factors, which I'm sure we'll get more into in our discussion in a minute, including cost effectiveness, efficiency, existing capacity, and sustainability versus market demand needs, and the availability of labor, raw materials, intermediate goods in the production processes. Regardless, resiliency, diversification, and security are critical to the long-term health of Americans and of America's public health supply chains. And we have benefits ranging from ensuring competitiveness to promoting innovation to providing geographic spread for redundancy from environmental and transportation disruptions. I will close my remarks by just saying that I'm happy to be part of this process, and it is a real honor to work on this important topic. I look forward to speaking with you more about this in the question period.